What is it to be awake? Are you really awake, or are you still only awakened? There's a lot of people that use this terminology, but there's really no die-hard definition of what it means to be awake. One might offer that on the surface level, it's a basic understanding and realization that maybe, just maybe, your world isn't quite what you've been told it is. That things don't quite operate the way that society would suggest, or that our conditioned education suggests. It can be said that this would be the base premise required for someone to even become awake. When I look at awake, I look at it as an opening of the eyes to certain realities that we're conditioned to keep us locked into a system. A system controlled by an elite few. And I call them elite not because they're better than us or that they're somehow more important. They are elite simply because they have more power, finances, and resources in order to perpetuate and propagate their continued control. Now, for me, my journey started many, many, many years ago when I started to look at different things and a wider picture of the world around me, the people around me, the struggling of people around me, my own struggling, the way that certain ones seem to be rewarded and are foisted onto pedestals and success and renown, while others doing similar never wind up having the same thing happen to them. So, initially, if somebody starts to question their own reality, if they are self-critical and have really done their best, and they still continue to kind of hit that brick wall, eventually they come to a point where they do start to question. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're awake. And the reason why it doesn't necessarily mean they're awake is because they still can't answer the whys. They can't, at that point in time yet, look at the reality of situations and understand why it is the way it is. So, for most people, when they start questioning these realities, one of the first lines of reasoning and what I call the blame placing portion of awakening is they begin to look at government. Now, in the past few decades, that's kind of become very blatant and right out there in front. But this is something that started back as early as 1900, maybe even before that. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily a case where it didn't happen before then. It just, over the past couple decades, where it comes to government, it seems more and more blatant. Now, part of that may be because of past presidents that have actually tried to warn us. Particularly, we had Kennedy, before he was assassinated, who mentioned in a very famous speech about, things that were downplayed, hidden, things being done covertly. And in this speech, he basically tried to warn the American public of a control structure that might exist that maybe didn't stop merely at the government level, that went beyond it. We also had President Eisenhower during his farewell speech, who had warned us about the military-industrial complex. So those are two instances where at least our presidents tried to make the populace aware of these control dangers. Whether this is at a time where they were just getting fully entrenched in place or not, I'm not positive. As I said, through research that I've done, I can trace it back to at least the early 1900s. There were certain, in America anyways, in certain other countries and in certain other control points, it goes back to the Inquisition. It goes back to the 1500s. So, lately, the government corruption seems very blatant. It seems very out in front. Technology may play a role in this. And it may have been something that was going on, but because of what is controlled, it just wasn't so out there in your face like it is now. We have an internet which they are trying to have the ability to filter and regulate. That, to me, and the push that and excuses they've been using to try to do that, very much says to me that the internet and the freedom as represented and the flow of information, because of alternative media and others, is putting a crank into their plans. So they kind of need to draw that back in line so that the free flow of information is not so free-flowing. The problem is, because of this in-your-face government corruption stuff that goes on, when people recognize this and they see it, a lot of times they stop there. That becomes the root of the issue to them, and they dig no further. Now, when you look at our conditioning as a society to where many have become so completely, totally, and utterly shallow, it's really no surprise that people will have this realization and then they dig no further. You know, we're inundated through lamestream media and movies and everything else about the shallow Barbie girl, you know, for guys, and you know the women get the, you know, hunk Fabio, you know, Barbie's Ken. Very shallow. Shallow does not dig in depth. So, for those that start to question that first hurdle, so to speak, concerning government corruption, the question then has to become, okay, we have a corrupt government, but I mean, surely with the rampant corruption that's there at this point in time, then how is it that most of the people that get reelected wind up being the same people? And they're just as corrupt as they were during the last election cycle, but yet they're still being elected into office again. So this presents the need of a realization that, given the extra factors involved, if it was just corrupt government, then surely, come the next cycle, the corruption would be voted out. But it never happens that way, does it? And there's a reason why it never happens that way. And that's because there is a control structure even above government. And that is why the voting stuff never fixes things. So, you know, then somebody starts to look at the whole, well, all right, so it's a corrupt government, but there's something that controls that. So, all right, well, what could control government? What is there out there that would have the ability to control government? Well, the next hurdle then becomes looking at the money in politics, and that usually comes from a couple places. It comes from lobbyists, which are usually hired by corporations, or lobbyists hired by special interest groups, or just corporations or special interest groups working without lobbyists. Then there is also the foreign national spend. Groups like CFR, APAC. So that's the next show. But really, with that, the interests are so diverse, there's not really a common factor that links all those together. Some might say, well, why does there need to be a link? Well, there needs to be a link because presidents as early as Reagan were talking about a new world order. Go look into it. Corporations of their own at that level they're still not the complete root. The next hurdle. Well, what controls corporations? Banks. When you start digging into some of the recent wars and conflicts, you find areas where world banks, central banks, were not even present in these areas until after they were hit by war or conflict. So when you're looking at corporation control, you're looking at banks and you're looking at shareholders. Then in comes the NWO agenda. These to me are all layers of an awakening process. Because of the complexity, it requires multidisciplinary knowledge and research. There is only one religion on this planet, one, that suggests a right to roll over the people like kings. Essentially, the right of the believers of that religion to roll over the rest of the world like cattle. If that isn't a new world order, I don't know what is. When you get to that level and you start to dig into that religion, why so many others of another religion support those of that religion, and you find the realities of that religion concerning all other people as opposed to the believers of that religion, then you will start to see the true roots of the problem. You will start to see the true roots of the control. And to me, at that point in time, then you will be fully awakened. Now, throughout my years of trying to figure this out, I've hit each of those plateaus. But it brought more questions. And I went looking for the answers to those questions. I haven't found anything else beyond that last level I spoke of as it relates to a new world order and a religion that pretty much coincides with it. The ones behind that are from some of the oldest families and oldest bloodlines on this planet. Thousands of years to amass large family fortunes, political power, and huge financial power. So now that you've watched this video, now you know what it means to me to be awakened. To see completely to the complete roots of our issues. Go dig into it. Find your own truths.